As introductions go, I'll just real quickly, state my point about my role in this industry. So I work for Hilton Inc., the second largest hotel company in the world. The proud owner of 18 brands, 960,000 rooms globally, 6,100 properties, throughout 118 countries again, globally. They are, I guess, the proud owners the proud company that has provided 106 million loyal members the chance to stay and experience great hotels throughout the globe. And I think it's kind of an interesting element of my position is that out of those 6,100 properties, my particular purview really focuses on the very few. The luxury portfolio of Hilton Inc. Is really limited to 74 in the entire world. So it's a drop in the bucket as it relates to the greater expanse of the portfolio. But I think at the end of the day, what it does is it's a very niche perspective into the portfolio that encompasses three of our very best brands. We like to call them halo brands, which is Waldorf Astoria, Conrad Hotels and Resorts, as well as LXR, which is a soft branded offering that Hilton launched a couple of years ago. And so, I think it's interesting as I segue into my presentation, which I'll start up in 1 minute, is to sort of make the bold declaration that I have never spent a day in my life in a hotel working, which is a weird thing to say, to a group of students who, with internship programs, probably surpass that by miles, right? So what is an individual who has not had that experience doing, presenting to, dozens of folks who have done that, at a very young age. And it's because I think the industry has more to offer than just the property level, which is, I think, one of the greatest aspects of this industry, is that it is so diverse in what you can do to participate in the core of what this industry is really about. That is to say that I had a very circuitous route to get into hospitality, but I do share, I think, at my core, passion, a deep passion for hospitality and what that represents. And so I hope as part of this presentation, what I can provide is an insight into alternative means of participation in this industry, to give our students just a lens into, again, if property level operations is a passion, there's no greater way to participate. But if it is an alternative means that you still have the passion for this industry, I hope today at least to provide you with an insight into how that might occur, and just to think about the industry a little bit differently from my lens, which is certainly a little bit more business to business related, and frankly alternative to what most think when they think of hospitality. So with that, I will share my screen, and let's see if this works. Okay. So as far as agenda, I do want to touch on a couple of things. And it's interesting, I started by providing a talking point to the college early on about what I wanted to talk about. And there were two things really. One more general, related to hotels specifically and our recovery within the industry. But two, and sort of put myself into a corner a little bit, is to talk about my specific participation in this industry, which is really related to development. I did think, actually, interestingly, going through this presentation over the last couple of weeks, as I developed it, sort of this play on words, that development, in my world, obviously means the growth of portfolios, the brick and mortar of how our our hotels and the offerings to our customers grow. But it is also sort of a play on how I think students can develop in different ways. And so I will touch on that a little bit as well. So far as agenda, I'm going to briefly talk about the recovery and how we think it's going from my perspective, from our general perspective, with a lot of good data. Then I want to touch on, I think, the heart of this presentation, which is to really identify what traditional folks might suggest is the customer that hospitality and the hospitality industry really focuses on, but then try to turn that on its head and talk about alternative customers and how that might play into different roles and responsibilities that our students might have as they progress in their careers, whether that's right out of college, making a hard pivot to a graduate level education, or it's just life happens sometimes. You choose an industry that might be adjacent to hospitality, but at the end of the day, the passion for hospitality drives you back home. And I just want the heart of this presentation is to really drive that point home, to say there's a lot of ways in which you can participate in this industry, and I want to address those in this. And then I think lastly is sort of to recall the concepts around recovery, and then trying to identify perhaps a different customer base than most on this call might be used to discussing. Talk about how the development community, my community, is really trying to advance the conversation around building hotels, building experiences for customers in the new era post-COVID. So that's the general agenda. So just quickly to talk about recovery, and I think the high level, insight here is that it's very positive. There's been a lot of contemplation around how long it will take for various segments of our market to recover. Some folks say, depending on the segment, could be as early as next year. Some in the industry, some leaders in the industry, analytics suggest 2023 is a marker where pre-2019 levels of performance, generally tend to recover. I'm here to suggest that Q4 2021, we're nearly there already, and it's a measure of a remix and a rethinking of how people travel and why people travel, and the great work that our property level operations folks do to source business in different ways that make the holistic performance of the hotels in various markets equal to or surpass prior performance in 2019. So this is just high level from CoStar Group HVS report that was conducted in October of 2021, so just this month. In the past 28 days, room demand indexed to 2019 was 91, meaning 91% of 2019 performance levels, and has been above 90% for the past 17 weeks on a moving 28-day basis. And so what that essentially suggests is, if you look at this chart, March of 2020 was where the big restrictions came into place. There was a massive decline as COVID really became rampant in the United States. And then there was a slow sort of ebb and flow of various outbreaks and recoveries and outbreaks and recoveries, to where beginning in January of this year, there was a sort of a march to normalcy, right? And performance has suggested, at least on an occupancy level, that we're certainly getting to the point of equal performance from 2019 levels. Again, with an order of decline, but say 92 and 91% of performance in 2019 is a lot to be happy and proud about in the year 2021, right? With a pandemic still very, very much active. From a RevPAR perspective, and this is certainly indexing against 2019 levels. Again, the percentage of markets with higher ADR this year than in 2019 has been above 70%. 14 of the past 15 weeks, we have seen higher ADRs than equal time in 2019 or in 2019 levels. And I think what that tells you is, I apologize, I have a friendly canine. What that tells us is there's a very successful remix of business that has occurred, right, to ramp up, because it's very obvious that there are certain segments in the hotel industry that have not recovered and have some time before they will recover, right? Business travel is optimistic. Folks are very optimistic about corporate business travel. But it necessarily, no one will tell you that it is recovered or that is anywhere near what it used to be in 2019. There's alternative ways to do business and the like. Group business, while active bookings are occurring, they have a farther out window. And so for this time period, it certainly is not of the equal to what it was in 2019 pre-COVID. But on the flip side, if you were to take a sort of a segmented look at the demand from a leisure perspective, it is quite literally off the charts. And so you'll notice in this chart, anytime you see sort of periods of time that are around holidays or high leisure demand zones, we are seeing spikes in RevPAR. Hold on one second, I apologize. So the takeaways, I think, are this. So the demand has returned to recovery levels, which means sort of in orders of magnitude 10% off of 2019, which as an overview versus what I think expectations were, where we're talking about 2022, 2023 levels, returning to 2019 levels. I think we're ahead of the curve. And I think there's quite a lot to be optimistic about. Another takeaway, just real quickly, is to suggest that leisure and transient business is king and has really led the recovery, which is a great thing. People want to travel. And I think that will, as I get into development, really dictate where development goes. And as a hedge to other downturns, I think you're going to see a lot of strong demand in the leisure space, resort space specifically, and the different, very creative ways that we can push development of hotels that meet that type of demand. Business travel, I think in our minds, in a lot of the industry's minds, will return for three key reasons. People believe in face-to-face communication, and as great as this is, and I think it's a very great platform, to be able to do this all from remote locations. Doing this in person would have been 10 times better, right? I think we can all agree on that. And I think that's the case with business client relationships and such as well. But two, people have an innate desire to travel, whether that's for business purposes or for any purpose. That innate desire is important. It's really hard in my world, at least, just speaking selfishly, to want to assess a market, assess a specific site location, assess a conversion opportunity, frankly, assess the relationship that we might have with the prospective owner without meeting them in person, feeling and touching the product itself. It's really difficult. And then three, I think there's a lot of chatter about how much travel will actually occur after the fact. I tend to lean towards the idea that there's an extremely high rate of return on business travel. Yes, you get sort of the common speak about boondoggles and the like, and maybe that won't occur as much anymore. But again, that face-to-face interpersonal experience and interaction, I think really does create high rates of return for companies. I think companies will see that and get folks traveling again. And obviously, I know it starts with our industry as the spearhead. We're starting to travel more, and hopefully that's a lens into what occurs in the future. And then lastly, I think group business just generally is being booked just further out. into those years of 2022 and 2023. We just launched a 3,500 room hotel in Las Vegas. Hilton did, with 3 of our brands at Resorts World Las Vegas, in the middle of a pandemic. And our bookings could not be stronger for the remainder of this year from a group perspective, from the remainder of this year and next year. So much so that sort of the immediate response, if any of you saw some of the news clippings from Ginting, which is the owner and operator of that property, was we need to expand the meeting facilities because we have more rooms than the meetings can handle. We feel very confident about the group business, and so that's a strategy that they intend to invest heavily in, and we're seeing that across the board. Whether that's a convention center hotel in Atlanta, a group-oriented hotel in Savannah, more convention space in downtown Los Angeles, and obviously convention hotels in Los Angeles. So I think generally speaking, that business, everybody's very confident will return. It's just a matter of time. So that's kind of the overview, I think, just again, the high level, because I thought it was important to touch on where from a hotel perspective, we sort of see the recovery at this moment. I think for the next few minutes, I want to touch on, I guess, my experience in the industry, and for our students' sake, try to, again, enlighten them on alternative ways to participate in this industry. And do that first and foremost by suggesting that there is no more important customer than I think the sort of the common one that all of us would sort of think about, which is our guests, right? It's literally in the vision statements of my company, of some of the largest companies in the world, that it's very experience and guest centric. And obviously, when we talk about our customers, from the transient folks, and not to read this, but from the transient business to the corporate business to our group business, the various ways that we have these ancillary industries of wholesalers and brokers, and group contracts and the like. These are obviously, and I want to emphasize that, obviously the core business of this industry. And I sort of continue on with this presentation, not to demean or belittle the impact that this particular reality has for this industry, which is, again, first and foremost, the property level is sort of the lifeblood of this industry, and that interaction between our staff and our guests is core. But and again, just to emphasize that point, sorry, I just highlight two mission statements just to emphasize that point, right? Hilton's mission statement is really to fill the earth with the light and warmth of hospitality by delivering exceptional experiences, every hotel, every guest, every time. Marriott's is to become the premier provider and facilitator of leisure and vacation experiences in the world. I'm under no illusion that what I do on a day-to-day basis is not really reflected in this vision statement. And so again, to point out, this is the core to our industry. Now I'll sort of transition to say, but I think it behooves to question that there is this sort of adjacent industry, adjacent skill set, and a very large collective of individuals who are passionate to their core about hospitality, which begs the question is the investment community also a customer? Is that a customer that we should focus on? And I think given what has happened in the last couple of years, where yes, absolutely, our property level staff have taken a massive hit, whether that's furloughs, closures of hotels, et cetera. And that is something that I think, I would say generally, we focused on tremendously, right? How do we ease the pain of that event? I'd say likewise, there is a bit of a growing focus on, even in good times, but particularly sort of coming out of this, the influence of the investment community, our owners of our hotels, the bankers, the lenders who create, I think, the sort of the money line, if as it were, to really creating these phenomenal places, and just asking the question in terms of how we support them, potential career opportunities. Are they also someone we ought to pay attention to and understand their goals? What is their role in all of this industry, and how can, if you're a student and the property level isn't your passion, or you love this industry but you have a design eye, or you really love numbers and you love the idea of sort of understanding waterfalls and waterfalls of cash distributions and debt service coverage ratios and all those sorts of things, that there are ways to participate in this industry that goes beyond the property level. Just a couple of data points to suggest that, and I'm going to lead myself a little bit here, is to suggest, yes, I think we ought to focus as a college, and students ought to think about the pathways to participate in this industry, is to look at a couple of broad numbers, and that is to suggest, as an overview of the global hotel industry, 25% of the hotels that exist out in the world, and it's a much larger number actually in the United States, are branded, meaning you have an ownership group who has an investment group that has built a hotel and has asked a third-party operator, whether that's a franchise, a third-party operator through a franchise agreement, or it's self-managed by a brand itself, to be the steward of that property, right? And it's surprisingly pretty hands-off as it relates to ownership and operator, for a lot of reasons. But by and large, it's a release. It's an agency, owner-agency relationship where there's a lot of trust that goes into the ownership group, and frankly, a lack of expertise, right? And a sort of a submittal of expertise to an operator to say, you control what I just built. And yes, there will be some sort of interaction as it relates to sort of the high level mission of this property. But by and large, what we want you to do is run this property. And so in that respect, I suggest to you, 25% of the hotels in the world are through this owner agency relationship. Then the properties themselves have a customer relationship with their owner in a way, right? And so in that respect, there is a lot of placating and conversations and the like between property level and the investment community to understand their goals the same way we would understand the goals of the guest, and provide solutions for that very reason. So again, I think it's important to sort of suggest in my mind that while this may be the traditional sort of understanding of the hospitality industry, that we have properties out in the world and they provide experiences and services to their customers, who are by and large the guests. There's also this entire and vast world that is sort of sitting adjacent to it, where owners, investors, financiers are also the customers of the hotel itself. And then through adjacency again, various business to business industries, play that same customer relationship role with the owners and investors and financiers, whether that's design and architecture, whether it's food service consultation, whether it's legal, whether it's lending. There's a lot of ways, from my experience, to get involved in this industry that is very bespoke and specific to a certain skill set. Again, whether that's design or construction or banking, that participates in this industry in an enormous way. And I want students to understand that, because it's how I got into this. Again, I never worked a day in a hotel in my life, My passion was really real estate. And my formal education was in real estate. It just so happens that by far, so again, I think it's important to sort of suggest in my mind that while this may be the traditional sort of understanding of the hospitality industry, that we have properties out in the world and they provide experiences and services to their customers, who are by and large the guests. There's also this entire and vast world that is sort of sitting adjacent to it, where owners, investors, financiers are also the customers of the hotel itself. And then through adjacency again, various business to business industries, play that same customer relationship role with the owners and investors and financiers, whether that's design and architecture, whether it's food service consultation, whether it's legal, whether it's lending. There's a lot of ways, from my experience, to get involved in this industry that is very bespoke and specific to a certain skill set. Again, whether that's design or construction or banking, that participates in this industry in an enormous way. And I want students to understand that, because it's how I got into this. Again, I never worked a day in a hotel in my life. My passion was really real estate. And my formal education was in real estate. It just so happens that by far, and I say this bluntly, I think, by far the most interesting product type in the real estate world is hotels. And it is because it is not only a real estate play where you have to think about the ebbs and flows of asset valuation and the like, but it is a living, breathing operation where people's relationships matter, and it's day to day. It's not monthly like a multifamily product type. It's not over the course of 30 years like a residential contract. It's not over the course of multiple years like an office. It's day to day, and the successes can happen very fast, as we've seen with this recovery. The failures can happen just as fast, because those day-to-day relationships can go away and come quite fast. So I think it's just important as we talk about who this new customer is, in my mind, just to understand what their goals are, really. And I'll use a couple of sort of news clippings to suggest a couple of these. But really, I think the approach from an investor perspective is this. The money world, right, goes out, and these are primarily real estate folks, right? But also, I think we should give them credit, absolutely passionate about hospitality. These are money folks who go out and fundraise, right? And so they have a goal of releasing that capital and that earning potential to the world, right? They'll typically, fundraise, millions to hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, and have a sunset period to invest that. They also have a sunset period to get it back and provide their investors returns. And so the goals of these companies is to go and really treat operating assets like real estate assets, valued assets. And so I think the property level needs to understand that interplay. What happens? Why do they buy hotels? Why do they sell hotels? It's not because a hotel is underperforming. That's not why a lot of hotel investors get out. It's just because of the nuances of their fundraising and how that works. But then again, some owners, have other strategies in mind rather than that. I would say that's more the description of an institutional investor, like a real estate investment trust or something like that. Others have legacy in mind, right? They're owner operators. They are proud of something they've built, or proud of something they've owned for generations, perhaps. And the returns are perhaps less important. It's really about the legacy and the service that it provides to its customers. And that's something they focus on. And we should realize as potential service members in those hotels, or from my perspective, as a brand steward. Others, will look at investment or development of hotels as simply a way to synergize alternative products, right? LVMH is a good example. Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy primarily does not play in the hospitality field, but they've recently gotten into it because what they want to do is control the luxury customer. And so if they can do that through beverage, or if they can do that through goods, luxury goods, or they can do that through experiences in hospitality, that's what they want to do. And so we need to understand that, because that has a different nuance than perhaps an institutional investor or an owner operator would. And then I think the other thing to think about is just, again, understanding that certain owners look to diversify, right? Whether that's understanding that, they might have a portfolio that leans focus service, which is, the Hilton Garden Inns and the Courtyards of the world, to luxury assets like a Four Seasons or a Waldorf Astoria or an Auberge. It might be that they lean heavy North American versus South American, or they want both. And so just understanding that the diversity and the diversification requirements of that owner investor is important. And so I say all this to suggest, again, we have to treat them like customers, and each of these customers has different requirements, the same way someone who's coming for business would to a hotel, someone who's coming for leisure with their family. And I think the way that we can do that is numerous. And again, just to get the point across to the students, it doesn't have to be at the property level. It can be elsewhere, which is, in my mind, just truly fascinating. It really opens up the platform upon graduation or moving on through your career for just endless opportunities to sort of grow and really fine tune exactly how you want to participate in this industry. These are just, again, some clippings just to highlight the points a little bit. Again, you have Alex Rodriguez, who's a baseball player, right? Whose whole goal is to diversify his asset portfolio. So what does he do? He teams up to create a fund, a $650 million fund, to invest exclusively in hotels. Maybe it's because he likes hotels as an investment strategy, or it's because he's already invested in restaurants and he's already invested in multifamily. And this is the next way to create a little bit of diversity. Again, there's other examples of ways that this can occur. And again, it's sort of a global phenomenon and something that we ought to think about. I show this to suggest, again, it's not about looking at, again, transactions or the activities of ownership in a vacuum. If you were sort of, call it a line level staff member at the Mandarin Oriental in Las Vegas, or the director of food and beverage at the Mandarin Oriental in Las Vegas, or the general manager at the Hotel del Coronado, which is a part of the strategic hotels and resorts portfolio, the sale of those hotels has nothing really to do with, whether or not that hotel, in a lot of ways, was performing, or you were doing a good job or a bad. And so I think just understanding the layers of this is really important for our students, because there's sort of larger tactics at play. And I think if you can sort of understand this at the most basic level, I think it really helps you if you choose to sort of remain at the property level, and certainly helps you if you choose to sort of dip your toes into the real estate world, into the development world, or those adjacent specialties. That this stuff happens because, again, there's a lot of strategy around in the investor community. For example, the Mandarin Oriental in Las Vegas was the #1 RevPAR hotel in all of Las Vegas when it sold. We happened to convert it to a Waldorf Astoria. And if you're a Mandarin Oriental corporate member, you're sort of kicking the wall a little bit, because it's like, what did we do? And then the truth is nothing, right? That there's just, in some instances, that world is separate and apart from the property level, but it's equally fascinating. They're intertwined, which is fascinating. And it's just something I want to bring to the attention of our students, because it's a whole other world, but it's related. And it's always interesting to sort of understand the nuances in that time. And then again, I think just thinking about owners as customers from an operations perspective, what will we start doing, right, from an operations perspective to really change how these hotels perform and act, that really changes, with the ebbs and flows of social norms and the like, right? Whether that's check-in, straight to room check-in, whether it's robots, whether it's more self-serve type stuff, whether it's the elimination of buffets forever, whether it's the elimination of the bathtub in luxury hotels. All those sorts of things are sort of ongoing conversations that start with the property level, sort of blend into, I think, the owner investor level with the discussions that I have every day. And then obviously, as we build new hotels and advance discussions into the future in the next era of hotels, sort of becomes a conclusion to those conversations, which again is quite fascinating. And again, I highlight this point real quickly just to suggest the world of business to business and hospitality, I think, is often overlooked. It's not the first thing people think about, but if you think about the sort of, again, the ancillary industries that can occur and that are thriving as a relationship to hotels and the general hotel industry, it's tremendous. And what it is its opportunity, and I think that's fascinating. So whether that's, again, manager-owner relationships and you work for a corporate brand company like myself, whether that's brokerage firms, and I know that we have several on our advisory committee that are in the brokerage world, really sort of guiding these investors and marrying them to operations based on their goals, whether that's specialty consultation, food service, wellness, food and beverage consultants, interior design consultants, lighting, engineering, all of those things that the general Cal Poly Pomona College or university thrives at can and will touch hospitality in some way if that's your passion. It's niche, and don't get me wrong, it is niche, but there is always interplay, and again, I think that's quite fascinating. Just as a quick example, I've sort of covered it a little bit. So this is our Conrad Los Angeles, which opens in March of next year. And by the way, Dean, they are going to be hiring like mad and there's rules around who they hire. It must be predominantly local. So just an FYI on that. But this is a 304-room hotel that we have just signed and opens in March of next year. It is 304 rooms that was developed by a New York company called Related Companies. And it is part of a mixed-use facility that includes a lot of diversity of product types, multifamily, affordable multifamily, obviously a luxury hotel, luxury retail. And so if you think about sort of the consolidation of all of those different elements into a project, of course, I think you're at a tremendous advantage if you understand hospitality the way that our students do coming out of Collins, if you're a part of this, right? And it's just sort of understanding the relationships between those various product types. But more than that, there was an RFP process for interior design that went global. That some of the best interior design firms that bid on it, and a group from the United Kingdom ended up getting it. So that exposure is, I think, tremendous. Frank Gehry was the architect. And so if you think about, the general student who might attend an architecture program in Los Angeles or elsewhere, who eventually works for Frank Gehry with no real understanding of the hospitality industry, and then at some point becomes specialized in it due to a passion, and then build something like this. It's just a tremendous insight into the breadth that we have in this college that I think a lot of people just don't appreciate. And it's to me, it's wonderful and fascinating. So again, I'll just end on this point, not to hammer it home too much, but is the investment community a customer? And in my mind, emphatically yes. And I think the more we can appreciate that reality, the more our students and obviously all of our colleagues in this industry will benefit from from what this industry has to offer and from that relationship specifically. So Dean, I think pertaining to development, specifically my role and sort of what is happening, from what I mentioned with COVID and the recovery, what is happening kind of moving forward, I think is pretty fascinating. And I'll touch on a couple of them just to give some insights for everybody listening to understand. I think there's a really interesting evolution of this industry in that it is starting to bleed into other industries in a very seamless way, where you're getting hospitality-like experiences in traditionally non-hospitality focused areas. A good example is residential, right? I think for the most part, we're all familiar with sort of the common unbranded residential component, residential development that might occur. A skyscraper in a downtown market, more horizontal mixed-use developments, multifamily developments, tract home developments out in the suburbs, right? And they're very much focused on the home buyer, that experience inside the walls. And I think what's happening as an interesting development is really this bleed of hospitality, the act of service into the residential space. It's kind of great as an evolution of what's happening in development, especially in the luxury space, but honestly happening with full service product, and in some cases focused service product internationally, is this desire to own real estate, receive the benefits of sort of that hotel-like experience in the place you live. And then from an investor perspective, it's highly beneficial because generally the economics of a hotel are a little bit challenging. And so residential allows you to sort of offset some of those costs up front with the sale of residential real estate. So there's this really interesting interplay between it financially works, it's very beneficial in that respect, and from a guest experience and a home buyer experience, it's magical and it's a game changer. And we see that in sort of the in the inertia of this type of development. Whether it's standalone residential or hotel and residential combinations, the desire for home buyers to want that experience, the desire for typical hotel guests to want sort of a lived-in experience with condominium hotels and the like. So this is definitely a trend that I think is advancing. And again, some of you might say, well, we've seen this for decades, and that is true. But it's always been in fits and starts, and it's always been very nuanced and kind of in small numbers. I think you'll see more and more of this across luxury, across full service, and whether that's sort of the inclusion of a hotel and residence, like this product is. It's a project of mine that we're doing in Miami, which will be the tallest building south of New York City, which is 200 traditional hotel rooms and 350 private residences. Mostly second homes, but again, wanting those services and that interplay between the hotel and their residents, with all those services and bells and whistles that you can imagine: housekeeping, valet, security, food and beverage, and the like. You're also getting some really interesting twists on this, which is kind of a new evolution, which is standalone, which is, can we provide the hotel hospitality leaning experience without the hotel, which it sounds counterintuitive, but it's becoming more and more of a thing. And simply the momentum for this is tremendous. This is a project here in Beverly Hills. It's a Mandarin Oriental. And again, it's challenging sometimes to, if you think about it from an owner's perspective, to say, I want, a lot of cities will be very careful about, density and the like. But, so how do I maximize the extraordinary cost of a site? Hotels sometimes is a loss leader in that respect, in that relationship. And so standalone concepts are becoming more and more of a thing. You'll see this a lot more. We are starting to do them. Ritz-Carlton residences have been occurring for several years now. Mandarin is really getting into it. But we're also seeing standalone Hiltons, standalone Marriotts. So it's quite interesting. The other thing I think is super interesting is really alternative products. How can our students provide or think about hospitality, the provision of service in a hospitable way, in something that's not so traditional, not hotel rooms and restaurants, but alternatives. And we're really starting to see the evolution of these very creative, experiential driven concepts come out more and more. This is an example of the Ritz-Carlton yacht collection, which I think they're launching in the Caribbean and the Southeast Pacific, which will be, again, sort of this hotel-like experience, but you're on a boat. And it's a little bit different than sort of a traditional cruise, in that it is not so dense and commodity based, but more, again, experiential, more about the service and the personal touches. But you're also getting it in really creative ways. What's old is new again. This is an example of the Belmond train experience, right? So what they'll do is they have a couple of Belmonds in South America. This is prevalent in Europe. You'll start your stay, if you're a guest, at a hotel, then do a travel experience through one of these very curated, highly serviced trains with overnight stays in what is essentially a luxury experience to take you to a secondary location to complete your stay. Completely out of the box, if you think about it from that perspective. Most people travel to a destination and stay in that destination. This is suggesting something entirely different to set it apart, and it's starting to become very prevalent. A lot of others are starting to think about this concept in the development world and understand how they can achieve something similar, but slightly different. Again, Four Seasons has gone another route to say, let's still focus on the hotels, but isn't it a shame, and I think this is a really interesting point, that you have this wonderful, let's say, 7-day experience at Hualala in Hawaii, but getting there and coming back home is miserable. It's high stress. And so by the time you get home, you feel like you hadn't been on vacation. You're just walking through the door exasperated. And so Four Seasons, as an alternative to that, as a solution to that quandary, has said, how about we provide that experience from beginning to end, from car service to the actual flight itself. We have this Four Seasons experience, throughout, which again is a new way of thinking about it, that owners are really starting to dig into and wonder, how can we provide it? And so all that is to say, again, if I'm a student, think outside the box, right? Understand what's next might not be known today. And maybe it's a pivot on a traditional concept. It's a reimagining of a historic concept that might make all the difference, and really hit the ground running with a lot of momentum. Another big evolution that we're seeing, or trend that we're seeing, is a little bit more traditional, which is really the drive-to destinations. You would be surprised at, and I was a little bit surprised to understand this, but so the Hudson Valley area of New York City, in its heyday, 70, 80 years ago, was a mecca of luxury travel. People getting outside of the city for space and relaxation. It fell on very hard times, obviously, in the last, call it 50, 60 years, because of the advent of air travel. When COVID happened, this idea of a local destination that allows for a respite became very in fashion again. And so you're seeing a lot of momentum in that space, which I think is fascinating. For us in Los Angeles, maybe closer to home, Palm Springs is becoming a place that is just booming with opportunity. There's a Montage and a Pendry that are under construction. There's a dream hotel that's under construction, and Andaz that is under construction. And so this drive to destination concept is becoming very fashionable. This is a picture of the Montage in Hudson Valley. And again, it's not necessarily luxury, and I apologize if I've sort of focused exclusively on luxury, given that's my purview. But you know, this is a Margaritaville in Palm Springs as well, and so you know, I think it crosses all spectrums of demand, whether that's luxury, full service, focused service. This idea that you know, the escapism, but not too far of an escape, and certainly not, you know, via air travel at the moment, at least, is very very interesting to a lot of people. So this is a trend that we're seeing in the development world that's pretty fascinating, and I think will continue for quite a while. The robustness of leisure and the ability to withstand a downturn like we just saw, I think, has given a lot of investors and developers a lot of confidence, which is great to see. All inclusives, I think, again, if we think about sort of the trend of going to a property that is a manicured experience, protected from, you know, sort of the surrounds, this is becoming much more of a fashionable vacation experience. I think traditionally you might expect, you know, you'd want to go to the Bahamas or to Jamaica and go out and see the local sites. In this case, I think the trend is becoming, I just want to get away. And by getting away, that doesn't mean I'm, at least at the moment, fully comfortable with that sort of fully immersive experience. I want it to be curated in a lot of ways. So we're seeing a lot of trends in all inclusives. And this has been several years coming, so it's by no means new. I think it's just hitting its stride now. Wyndham and Playa have come up with a recent partnership. We had a partnership with Playa as well, and are starting to do things more bespoke ourselves these days. Hilton, that is. Hyatt was a sort of a leader in this space with two brands that they specifically created for the purpose, with Ziva and Zilara. So it's a space that's growing, and it's, again, a great platform to think about moving forward in the development world. And then I think lastly, I'll just end on this, is just, you know, the idea of, from a brand perspective, all these brands really thinking outside of the box. You know, we've historically said sort of one cabin, one bed. And this is an example of a motto, which is our kind of entry-level focus service lifestyle approach and brand, you know, to bunks and family styles, 130 square foot rooms, really trying to answer questions from and inquiries from our ownership community, which says, you know, some of our guests, they just want the room for utility. They want to sleep there, but otherwise they want to experience the great public areas. And so this is a response to that. And again, this is unique by no means. A lot of branding companies and owners in that community are thinking about solutions like these. And again, I think it just begs the question to our future industry leaders listening today, is just that some of these evolutions are you know, they happen slowly. They're minimal, like, you know, these simple concepts around a smaller room, the elimination of a bathroom, the addition of a second bed, the reemergence of old concepts like all-inclusive and drive-to destinations. But you know, I think the more that sort of that we are open to thinking outside of the box and understanding that community is a customer, how do we drive and continue to drive performance for them, really leads to good guest experiences and on property, an easier way to sell, which is great. And with that, Dean Dobson, that I think concludes what I had to talk about today. And of course, happy to answer any questions about whether it's my role, sort of what I talked about today, or just questions in general. Happy to answer. And
well, thank you, Erik. That was very, very interesting. We have some questions in the chat if you have time, if you have time to hang around. And Anne usually kind of leads that discussion.
I apologize. I went long. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. We have a lot of interest in the chat. And
yes, so our first question says, you state that the top 5 hotel groups have increased their market share by 6%. Who are the top 5 hotel groups?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. So it's obviously Marriott, Hilton, Accor, which is a French-based company, Hyatt, and I believe it's Intercontinental. There is actually I believe actually, and that's, I would say this, of the Western, call it the Western Hemisphere operators. There are some very bespoke, very large Chinese conglomerates that are larger than that, but they tend to play in the very local environment of China.
Next question is from Gloria. She says, you mentioned the owners, investors are, quote, releasing earning potential to the world. Is this primarily referring to the multiplier effect, or does it also include investing into the wider community development?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think, okay, so from a new build perspective, it's certainly the latter, right? It's that in municipalities, planning, the planning agencies, administrators of various cities are being very clever in how they, how they approve and allow for the expansion of new developments. And that a good example is Related. They wanted to, their primary reason for being in downtown Los Angeles was this development, which is, again, retail, multifamily, and hotel. That is their core business. To do so was a reinvestment into Grand Avenue, a reinvestment into the arts and cultures of downtown Los Angeles. They developed the Broad Museum, which is a phenomenal experience for locals in the arts world. And they developed, through a land lease, the Grand Avenue Park, which is the park that runs from, I believe, the Water Administration building down to City Hall. And so, there's a lot of sort of that interplay between developing the thing that you're intending to build, which is a hotel or a mixed-use product, but also being a good steward of the location, because I think the greater the location, obviously, the better, and more appealing your destination is going to be. I hope that answered that question.
Next question is from Adrian. He says, what is the general consensus on the use of robots and technology in the hospitality industry? I've always considered the human-to-human interaction as an integral part of the industry.
Yeah, I'll only speak for myself. And again, I focus primarily on luxury, and I don't think it has a future in that space. There's something very important about person-to-person interaction. Now, that's not to say that technology won't be a factor. A good example is to differentiate between our Conrad and Walter Pastore brand. We have straight-to-room check-in if needed. It's sort of a self-guided experience through our mobile app. And we say that the Conrad guest tends to lean technology first. So it's service when you want it, versus Walter Pastore is very in the traditional sense. The door is held for you, the bags are taken, they disappear until you're in your room. And so there's this very handheld, high-touch service element. So I think that aspect will sort of continue to advance in nuanced ways, but robots and the like, I don't think it should never, in my opinion, replace the sort of the service member.
Thank you. Next question is, how is the standalone experience different than boutique hotels from a brand such as large as Hilton? And will it be the end of smaller boutiques if they can't compete?
I don't think so. I mean, I think they offer something much different. The downside to a brand company, if there is one, and I'll be candid, is that because it is a portfolio, there are standards, right? And so we have very specific ideas around how we want that service to be done, how we want the look and feel and the ethos of that brand to be represented in that location, for good and bad. There's something really nice about knowing that I've stayed at 5 Conrads, and so I'm going to Wuhan, and I'm going to stay at the Conrad in Wuhan. And I know that I'll have a pretty consistent experience, but there's something very magical about sort of those owner-operated boutique boutique experiences. Now, the brand world is trying to get into that a little bit with these soft brand collections. We have one in LXR. There's the luxury collection. Auberge has a collection of resorts. Belmond is sort of a branded collection. And I think that is where the impact might be most felt. But I think, again, there's good and bad to it, personally.
Thank you. The next question is about the student describes it as a topic hotel, but such as the Disneyland Hotel, the Legoland Hotel. What are your thoughts on the future of those types of hotels? There's a Chinese company named Chengalong, which focuses their hotels on topics like parks or zoos.
Yeah, Chengalong is, I think for the purpose, I think, they're perfectly excellent hotels. If your intent is to immerse yourself in Disney, sort of no better place than to be at the Floridian or the Contemporary in Orlando. It's a holistic experience, and I think it does what it does very well. I think if you tried to suggest you would roll that out to sort of be more than just a sort of an adjacent offering to the larger experience, whether that's Disney or Legoland, it gets a little tough and it becomes a little, for lack of a better term, kitschy, or it's tough to sort of pull off in an authentic way. But obviously there's absolutely a future in that, where it fits. I think where you're going to see, to your point about being very specific offerings that relate to the destination, I think you're going to see a lot more of the national park type hotels and resorts that really play off the destination more literally in a lot of ways. I think that's going to be something that will continue to grow and really be revitalized. What currently exists is a little bit tired and really in need of a new life, and a lot of people seem to be pretty passionate about that. So I don't see it going away or as a bad thing then.
Michael asks, if you had to choose a market to build a luxury hotel right now, where would you build?
Oh man, I would say, let's see. I guess speaking from, where we have gaps, Washington, D.C., Boston, San Francisco come to mind. But personally, I think the resort space is really where I would focus. I don't think it's an urban market per se. So I would say a drive-to destination like a Sonoma Valley, something up and coming that can offer really high-end experiences, but it's a little bit new than maybe the expected. That would be probably what I would suggest.
I think we'll end with the last thank you. The last question from Shante says, could you run us through the type of day-to-day duties that you do with your job?
Yeah, absolutely.
Day in the life of you look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a lot of, I'd say it's a lot of liaising between, inter departments, a lot of customer service related to talking with ownership groups. So I'd say on an average day, it could be that I have a presentation with an ownership group who's looking to develop a site. And my job is to convince them of the merits of our enterprise and the merits of a particular brand that is bidding on the project. On the flip side, it could be that an ownership group is trying to entice Hilton to be interested in the site. And so it could be anything from really getting into the nitty-gritty of a location and understanding the demand generators for that location and whether or not we'd be interested in sort of entertaining a hotel there, in the luxury space. In a more literal sense, it's actually walking sites and walking markets and understanding it, traveling quite a bit to do that type of work. Oftentimes, I will do a lot of work with our feasibility investment analysis team, understanding we do a lot of underwriting for owners on their behalf to say, if we were to manage it with one of our brands, how would it perform to the, whether that's occupancy and ADR, whether that's expense margins. And so I'll do a lot of liaison between our feasibility team and the ownership group, sort of negotiating a landing spot for that underwriting. And then there's a lot of negotiations from a legal perspective on contracts, whether that's a management contract, whether that's a technical services contract, a license contract, as it were. And then I think the last thing that I've done sort of as a niche in my role is design planning liaison with our architecture and construction team. So in the luxury space, surprisingly, given that it's the highest risk, it's also the most entrepreneurial. The owners tend to be the most maverick, tend to be the ones who are less institutional. And so there's a lot of guidance needed, and it's what I provide, working with the architecture and construction group on what's the guest experience, how do you best organize this to create fantastic moments within the property from a planning perspective. What are the right size guest rooms, et cetera. So it's a little bit of all of that, jack of all trades, I would say.